Welcome to On the Other Hand, and a special welcome to Jorcio Ribeiro, Jennifer Ahara, William Rimmer, That Person, Diego Fernandez, and any other new viewers. The US presidential election is here, and in order to get my thoughts straight on who I was going to vote for, I decided to make a list weighing my options, and I thought it would make a good video. What really kicked it off for me was seeing this poll that most people who said they would vote for Biden were doing so because he isn't Trump. So let's bring out the pros and cons of Trump and Biden and see where I stand. And so you know my bias. I tend to be conservative, but in some ways I'm more centrist, and in some ways I'm more of a libertarian. And I'm not saying you need to think the same way I do on these points, I'm just putting out my perspective. So let's start in Trump's list. On the for side, the first thing is federalism. Now people argue back and forth how well the current administration has handled this pandemic, but a clear thing to me is that Trump did not use this crisis as a power grab and force his will on the people. Maybe you think it's a bad thing, but I'm a fan of allowing localities to make their own decisions instead of pushing a one-size-fits-all plan at the federal level. Trump has also condemned riots, looting, and violence, and he has since the beginning of the summer. I appreciate that. I also appreciate that he has let local governments handle their own problems the way they see fit. That being said, I also like that after months of rioting and destruction in places like Portland, Trump sent in federal law enforcement to stop destruction of federal property. I'm also a fan of the Middle East peace deals. I have heard criticism that the deals aren't really worth much, but I think peace is worth every little bit we can get, and I want to say it's been 25 years since the last deal like this. And can I mention Trump hasn't started any wars? That's also something that hasn't happened for quite a few presidencies. Speaking of past presidents, the past 3 have promised that they would move the US embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, but none have. Trump said he would, and he did. I can appreciate someone keeping their word, and I'm a fan of officially recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. Speaking of the Middle East, I was on the fence for a while about if the Iran deal was a good idea. Was it worth not sanctioning a country so that they wouldn't develop nuclear weapons? When Trump pulled out of the Iran deal, I got my answer, because this is what Iran's parliament did in response. Yeah, if Iran burns the US flag and chants death to America after we pull out of an agreement, I don't really trust Iran. So, I'm really glad Trump has pulled out of the Iran deal, because I don't want to treat that nation like an equal if that's how they act. Speaking of international relations, Trump has had China on the brain for years, as can be seen in this montage.
Let's say China. 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 China.
People made fun of him for having an obsession with China. Come to find out though, China would lie about a pandemic, lie about its risks and seriousness, silence those who would warn the world, and then blame the US, not to mention all the human rights violations and suppression of Hong Kong. So I'm glad Trump has put China at the forefront of the conversation. As I've gotten into keeping up with the news as a hobby, I've realized that there are a lot of dishonest people involved, particularly certain networks and journalists. Now that's not wholly their fault. News business models are driven by clicks, so they have an incentive to be slightly informative, but mostly just sensational echo chambers. Anyway, Trump has not been afraid to call out those who are particularly bad in this regard, and I appreciate that. I also appreciate that Trump has taken out the leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, as well as Soleimani, Iran's military commander. Both were horrible guys, and I'm glad they can't hurt any more people. And even though some speculated there would be backlash, it never came. So Trump made a good judgment call to make the world a safer place with minimal risk. Trump definitely isn't perfect at getting his points across, but I appreciate that he has addressed illegal immigration. Now, I'm not a fan of family separation, but it is the executive branch's job to enforce the law, not to make judgment calls on which laws should be enforced and which shouldn't. I also find it interesting that the previous administration took little to no flack or media attention for doing the same things Trump has done. And when it was a hot topic, many pictures circulating were actually from the Obama administration. Trump helped pass tax cuts, and that benefited most Americans. I like lower taxes, and I dare say so do most people. Trump also cut some spending in welfare, and I'm in favor of that. I think a social safety net is a good thing, but I also think it's abused too often and doesn't necessarily help people help themselves. Under Trump's administration, the US has hit energy independence, which is awesome. That isn't to say that we don't need trade or are self-sufficient, but it's awesome to see that we are not in a net negative energy state. I'm also a fan of the judges that have been appointed under the Trump administration, and I think ACB will make a fine addition to the Supreme Court. I'm a fan of people who try to make judgments based on what is written in the laws, not what they want the laws to be written like. Finally, I'm a big fan of Trump's ban on critical race theory for government contractors. This wasn't a ban on diversity training or infringement on speech. It was just an executive order saying that if you want federal money, you shouldn't have trainings that teach that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, that the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist, that an individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. It goes on, but that's messed up stuff, and taxpayer money shouldn't be used for such ideological purposes. So those are the standout reasons I like Trump. The negatives are that he has spent a lot of money, as seen by this clip.
Occasionally, Trump did propose slowing a program's growth, but Congress wouldn't even allow that, calling it
the blueprint for destroying America.
So what's Trump's total spending impact?
Government spending has been skyrocketing.
Spending's up by $1 trillion a year. Therefore,
the federal deficit has hit a record.
I know Trump has had to handle a global pandemic, but even before that, he didn't really seem like he tried to balance government spending. I'm also not a fan of the tariff wars Trump got into. I agree that in some fronts the fight was needed to be had, but in most areas, the freer the trade, the better, in my opinion. Now, an obvious one. I'm not a fan of Trump's arrogance, rude disposition, and hyperbolic language. For many people, this in and of itself is a deal breaker. I don't feel like the president needs to be somebody we look up to personally, but it would be so much better if Trump just stopped getting in fights and uninstalled Twitter. I'm also not a fan of how little Trump has done in the first 2 years of his office. Not that it's all on him, but if he had worked as hard in those first 2 years as he has in these second 2 years, he could have fulfilled so many more promises. I'm also not a fan of the anti-BDS executive order Trump put in. I understand it's hard to draw the line between the Jewish people and the Jewish nation, and I think we should support Israel. But I don't think it's a good idea to shut down criticism of Israel either. Now, I realize that after the passing of RGB, it was good optics to pick a woman Supreme Court nominee. But I'm a fan of meritocracy. The best judge should have been considered, and if that was a woman, great. But I don't like that Trump picked his nomination based on gender first and merit second. Now, on to Biden. Biden seems like a good family guy and seems to be loyal and kind, which is great. Biden says he won't sign an executive order that violates the Second Amendment. Considering the gun control measures some Democrats have suggested, it's nice to hear that Biden wants to stick to the Constitution. Biden has said he wants to restore voting rights to felons who have completed their sentences. I'm a fan of giving people second chances, so I think this is a great idea. Biden also opposes private prisons. I think for-profit prisons have a messed up incentive structure, and I don't want that when dealing with people's incarceration. I realize that was a pretty short positive list for Biden, but I really tried to find everything I could that I honestly liked on his platform. So I'm not a fan of Biden saying he will get Beto's help to solve America's gun problem. Beto gained infamy after saying, quote, "Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s." After Beto said that, he dropped out of the presidential race, endorsed Biden, and Biden had this to say.
I'm going to guarantee you this is not last year's scene of this guy. You're going to take care of the gun problem with me. You're going to be the one that leads this effort. I'm counting on you. I'm counting on you. We need you badly. The state needs you. The country needs you. You're the best. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm not a fan. Now, Biden did a good job condemning some of the riots that have been happening, but after 4 months of nightly riots in Portland, Biden never said a word. He did finally come out and say violence on both sides should be condemned in Portland, but that seemed like it was more done out of political necessity rather than an actual desire for violence in Portland to end. If you remember back to the spending clip I showed earlier, here's the second part of that addressed Biden.
Deficits and debt destroy economic growth.
Nobody's talking about this stuff. You must be frustrated.
Yeah, it is frustrating after 51 years of history as an organization to see this kind of attitude, this kind of carelessness.
the bottom line.
Who's worse, Trump or Biden?
I'd have to give the edge to Biden.
That's because he now wants more than $1 trillion in new spending.
I don't like that Biden has promised more spending than Trump. We have a huge national debt, and I don't want it getting any bigger any faster than possible. Biden has also said he'll make a federal mask mandate. I don't like the government forcing people to do things. We should be free to make choices, even if they're bad choices, and we can't and shouldn't outlaw stupidity. Biden supports a $15 an hour minimum wage across the country. Now this doesn't make much sense, seeing as the cost of living varies so widely across the country. But also, if minimum wage goes up, so does the cost of living. Businesses have to charge more to stay afloat. So all I see that jump in a minimum wage doing is driving up wages and prices, so that in the end, we aren't any better off than we currently are. Biden has also flip-flopped on fracking, as seen in this montage.
Joe Biden's record being called into question once again after going back and forth on how progressive he really is. Here's what Joe's now saying about fracking after being attacked by President Trump.
I am not banning fracking. Let me say that again. I am not banning fracking, no matter how many times Donald Trump lies about me.
But it wasn't that long ago when Biden was saying this.
Would there be any place for fossil fuels, including coal and fracking, in a Biden administration?
No, we would work it out. We would make sure it's eliminated and no more subsidies for either one of those.
I'm talking about stopping fracking as soon as we possibly can. No ifs, buts, and maybes about it. I'm talking about speaking to China. Well, I'm not sure your proposal does that.
I would not stop fracking. I'd gradually move away from fracking. I would just not do more fracking on federal lands.
Now, if it's important enough to consider outlawing, it should be obvious if you actually want to outlaw it. Not to mention fracking has actually brought down US emissions because it burns cleaner than coal. Biden also runs on a platform where he wants to extend Medicaid benefits to illegal immigrants. I want people to be able to live the best lives they can. However, if we provide full medical care to literally anyone who can make it into the country, we are putting up some pretty good incentives for people to do whatever it takes to get here. Biden also seems to have a double standard for his own administration and Trump's. Biden claims no fault for economic hardships, riots, diseases, or treatment of immigrants during his time as VP, but seems to blame Trump for literally all of these things during his time in office. He just seems like he's trying to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and I would prefer a more honest approach. I don't like the Biden pick Kamala because I think it's garbage to pick someone based on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. And speaking of Harris, Biden doesn't seem to be in the best of health, and that scares me because Harris scares me. She, unlike Biden, said she would issue an executive order that violates the Second Amendment if Congress didn't do what she wanted within 100 days of being in office. That's not the kind of leader I'm looking for. Harris also has a double standard when it comes to assault allegations. When it came to the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh, she had this to say.
Senator Harris, this is a classic he said, she said case. Somebody isn't telling the truth. He says he wasn't even at the party. So what is your process to determine who's telling the truth here?
Well, listen, I think it's going to be about, it comes down to credibility, to your point, Gail, and it's going to be about listening to what each party has to say. But I believe her. Listen, first of all, anybody who comes forward at this point to be prepared to testify in the United States Senate against someone who's being nominated to one of the most powerful positions in the United States government, that takes an extraordinary amount of courage. And frankly, you know, I have personally prosecuted sexual assault cases, and my concern is, and she knows this, she is putting herself out there knowing that they're going to try and excoriate her. And she's doing it, I believe, because she knows that this is an important matter. It's a serious matter who serves on that court. And she has the courage to come forward. She has nothing to gain.
So, Senator,
what does she have to gain?
So given those concerns, would you ever put a crime survivor on the stand, let alone before the American people, without first doing an investigation?
I believe that the FBI, Nora, to your point, it should be compelled to do its job in terms of completing their background investigation.
So that was a year ago. But in March, a woman named Tara Reade came forward with assault allegations against Biden. But Harris has remained silent. If Ford, who was Kavanaugh's accuser, should be believed and was credible, why isn't Reade? If Ford had nothing to gain and was courageous, why isn't Reade? Harris just seems very disingenuous to me. In the presidential debates, Gabbard also came at Harris with a very hard critique, and here's a recap and Harris's response.
Some of the toughest critique or attacks at you came from Tulsi Gabbard. Just for our viewers who haven't seen it, I just want to play some of that and have you respond.
Okay. I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform.
Did you expect that from Tulsi Gabbard? Had you had interaction about that in the past? And how do you think it went?
Well, I mean, listen, this is going to sound immodest, but I'm obviously a top-tier candidate, and so I did expect that I would be on the stage and take hits tonight because there are a lot of people that are trying to make the stage for the next debate.
Yeah, for a lot of them, it's do or die.
Well, yeah, and especially when people are at 0 or 1% or whatever she might be at. And so I did expect that I might take hits tonight. But, you know, listen, I think that this coming from someone who has been an apologist for an individual, Assad, who has murdered the people of his country like cockroaches. She who has embraced and been an apologist for him in a way that she refuses to call him a war criminal. I can only take what she says in her opinion so seriously. And so I'm prepared to move on.
Notice that Harris didn't refute any of Gabbard's claims. Harris just bragged about how much more popular she was. That sets off a lot of red flags for me. Another thing, Biden at a recent town hall was asked about an 8-year-old who was being transitioned. Transgender stuff is complicated, but transitioning an 8-year-old is child abuse, period. That's just messed up. Another recent thing has been the pretty serious claims of Joe Biden's involvement with Hunter Biden's income. I'm not saying I believe it, but I find it pretty telling that it is more credible than most anonymous claims made of Trump, and the Biden story has gotten swept under the rug, just like the assault allegation. Finally, Biden has dodged the question about packing the Supreme Court. Here's a good clip that summarizes what's been going on.
In October 2019, during the 4th Democratic presidential debate, Joe Biden was asked if he would add more justices to the Supreme Court.
Vice President Biden, the Constitution does not specify the number of justices that serve on the Supreme Court. Would you seek to add justices to the Supreme Court to protect women's reproductive rights?
I would not get into court packing. We had 3 justices. Next time around, we lose control. They had 3 justices.
And that's a sensible answer, but that was also a year ago, and President Trump has nominated a 3rd Supreme Court justice. So the question is, has Joe Biden changed his mind about packing the court? Well, let's ask him.
You know, that's exactly what they want me to talk about, so we don't talk about how they're violating the Constitution now.
Hate to cut you off, Joe, but that's not true. No one is violating the Constitution. Look it up. So I'm going to ask again. Will you pack the court?
It's a legitimate question, but let me tell you I'm not going to answer that question because it will shift all the focus. That's what he wants. He never wants to talk about the issue at hand. He always tries to change the subject.
So Joe won't answer because Orange Man bad. Got it.
Well, let's say I answered that question. Then the whole debate's going to be, well, Biden said or didn't say. Biden said he would or wouldn't.
So to summarize, a year ago, Joe Biden didn't have a problem saying that he wouldn't pack the court, but now he won't answer the question, saying that it's a distraction. And that means, yeah, he's probably going to pack the court.
If I were to say yes or no to that, that becomes a big issue. That's the headline here.
No, it's only a big issue if you say that you're going to pack the court. Think about it. If Biden said, I won't expand the court, it would be a headline for a day, disappoint some far-left Democrats, and that would be the end of it. But by not answering it, well, it looks like he's hiding something, and then it stays in the news cycle.
So, that wraps up the list for both candidates. There are other candidates running, but I'm not impressed with any of them, nor do I think they have a shot at making a difference in this election. So in 2016, I voted third party, but I have been surprised by how much good President Trump has done. He is a deeply flawed human being, but when I judge what I value in both major candidates, I have come to the conclusion that I'm going to be voting for Trump. This isn't to say you need to vote for Trump as well. You probably have different thoughts or priorities than me, and that's fine. I just hope whatever decision you make is a deliberate and informed decision, and I hope that this video helps one way or the other. As always, thanks, hope you enjoyed. And if you did, consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you'll get notified for new uploads.